For some years, I've seen complaints about how men write women, but women were largely spared these accusations, and I think that is fair because most genres were dominated more by men than women. Women were really only dominant in genres like romance and women's fiction, whatever the heck that is exactly. So men were not really in that space to complain about how they were being represented, and even women probably weren't picking up a romance novel, generally expecting the man to be super true to life. But now the book market is starting to be dominated by women, and particularly fantasy novels are starting to get a lot of crossover with romance, and women are writing a certain type of man in these fantasy novels. So women used to be more likely to try to cater to a broad market, sometimes even taking on male pen names, writing male main characters specifically for the purpose of attracting both readers, because there's a common thought that men won't read books with a female protagonist, but women will read books with a male protagonist. But if most readers are women, nobody needs to worry about that anymore. Now, I feel that there is totally a place for both women and men to have their fantasy versions of each other, to write books that are pretty much intended for other men or other women to read, just to have a fantasy version of what love or sex would look like. And if your intention is to write one of these types of books, I don't think that you necessarily need to change what you're doing. But let's say whether or not you're writing a romance, you do want your characters to feel realistic. You would like your book to be able to be picked up by a member of the opposite sex and for them not to go, "What?" One of my viewers asked me if I would do a reaction video to a video that BookFox did not too long ago about common mistakes women make while writing men. I'm not going to do like an exact reaction to that video, but I did watch it when it came out, and I had some thoughts. And before we get into my many notes on this topic, what you just saw me drink is my favorite little secret weapon for getting through the day, Magic Mind. I was very excited when they reached out to me to continue working with them, because when I'm dragging, Magic Mind is often the little power-up potion that gets me through the day. I've been taking them for months now, and I have noticed how my baseline energy and focus have improved. I've been dealing with the fun that is perimenopause. Last week, I had this day where I just felt like all my hormones were working against me. But I drank my Magic Mind after lunch, and I could feel the gears of my brain starting to turn again. And I spent the afternoon working on this channel. The day was saved. Magic Mind is a mental performance shot, and what makes it so good is that it's not just a quick boost from caffeine. The nootropics help with mental clarity, and L-theanine and adaptogens are calming. So it's a sustained energy that helps me to think. I absolutely recommend this if you're struggling with brain fog, procrastination, or motivation like I've been. And with my QR code or link in the description, you can get 50% off a subscription, so you can see if Magic Mind works for you risk-free. You have 100 days to ask for a refund, even if you drank the shots. So it can be a tricky balance for sure to write male characters that are believable, but also maybe a little romantic. When I started out, I was writing young adult, and the first young adult author retreat that I ever went on, one of the accusations frequently leveled against us as young adult authors is that we would write these great romances, and nobody has a romance like that when they're a teenager. When you're a teenager, you date, you're experimenting, you're not falling in true love forever. But when I was at this retreat, we all got into a conversation about how we had met our significant others, and pretty much everyone at this retreat had met their significant other or started dating them while they were a teenager. I've been with my partner since I was 17, and he is my first boyfriend. So it kind of made me wonder if you're a little more likely to write romantic books if you yourself have experienced that kind of romance. I don't know if that's really true because escapism is certainly a thing, but I do think the best way to write a romantic but realistic guy is to just know good men in your life, whether or not you're actually dating them. I mean, I've drawn on not just my partner, but also friends I've had, male friends or his friends that are kind of both of our friends. I just try to observe the men around me in real life. If you're new here, my name is Lydia Foxglove. I'm a fantasy author and I've been making my living as a writer since 2009. Started out in traditional young adult publishing and then moved into indie publishing. Everything I write has been fantasy or fantasy adjacent, and everything has had a romance plot line, but I don't really consider myself a romance writer. I consider myself more of a fantasy writer, and that's kind of, it's a vibes thing. I'm not trying to be like a snob or anything. I just don't really fit in as well with romance writers. So here are the points that Book Fox brought up in his video. Mistakes women make while writing men. The first one was scent, having some kind of scent that a man would never have in real life. I have a theory about the smell of men in books. Because you know, when you're falling in love with someone and you're really smelling like their pheromones or whatever, like they'll smell good. But just saying in a book like his sweat smelled good, his musk, like, I mean, people do say that in books, but just there's only so many ways you can describe pheromones. So I honestly think that describing men as smelling like all these amazing smells is really just code for their pheromones. It's kind of like when wine is described as tasting like berries and chocolate, and really it just, to me, it just all tastes like wine. But that's kind of like code for different flavors of wine or different notes in the wine. It's not like you're literally gonna take a sip of this and be like, oh, it tastes like chocolate. I feel like the scent of men in books is not to be taken literally. So, ladies, have you thought this? When you read a description of a man's scent in a book, do you literally think that they smell like that? Or do you kind of understand, is this a code I've made up? Is this real? Of course, in a fantasy book, it is realistic that a man could smell like horse or leather, because he might literally be wearing leather. Wood smoke. My parents have a wood stove, so all fall and winter my dad does smell like wood smoke, as does my mom. For some reason, women don't get described as smelling like wood smoke very often, but another point he brought up is genius level emotional IQ. And I think part of this, to me, ties in with my theory that a lot of effective writers of romance, whether we're talking capital R romance or just a book written by a woman that has a romance in it, or even just an attractive man who isn't involved in a romance, I think that a lot of us female writers just have very high caliber, sensitive men in our lives. I would say that the men in my life that I keep in my life do have very high emotional IQ. I don't necessarily think this is unrealistic, more that writers are kind of emotionally sensitive people, so we sometimes select emotionally sensitive people to associate with. Now, with that said, there's like men that have emotional depth, and then there's men in books that are like fixated on the woman, that all they can talk about is like how beautiful she is and how amazing she is, and they're super attuned to like all of her needs and wants, and that gets into the territory of a woman's fantasy of what the perfect man would be like rather than a real man. I would say that most of the men I know, while they are emotionally sensitive, like they can tell like if something's wrong with me, and they are very open to a good emotional conversation. They don't always pinpoint like what's the problem and how to fix it. Men and women have like different styles, usually, of how to tackle emotional problems, how to talk to each other about emotions. So I can't say I've ever met a man who's just like, it's really not even the quality of his emotion. It's like how fixated the character is on the female lead. If they're fixated on the female lead, that's when you're in unrealistic romance territory. His fifth point, and I'm not going to talk about all of his points because some of them I haven't really noticed, and I don't know if that's the type of books that I choose to read or if I'm just not picking up on it in the same way or what. Some of his points I just can't really comment on because I haven't really noticed them as being like super prevalent myself. And some of those are his third point, sexual fidelity as key morality. His fourth point, the only men in the book are a romance option and not just a random character who does other things that aren't romantic. And number 9, men in general, that all male minor characters are sometimes evil, and the only one who isn't is love interest or gay best friend. I don't know if these are the kind of books I choose to read or what, but I would not say these are super common in the books that I read. But his fifth point was deeply improbable contradictions in a character. He mentioned like a motorcycle mechanic who is also the best listener. I've totally met guys like this in real life. People surprise me all the time. So to me, this is kind of a level of, is it a contradiction or is it just like perfection? Because there's the character that has inherent contradictions, and then there's the character where everything about him seems tailor-made to be the perfect man. And as a writer, I do think that you need to consider how much you want your writing to reflect your personal taste. And this is true in many areas, like even outside of romance or male characters, or even when it comes to world building or anything else. There's probably certain things that just you really like these particular things. Maybe it's a certain kind of plot line, a certain kind of tragic past, a certain kind of job that you enjoy writing your characters to be employed in. It could be like literally anything. When I first started writing, I always felt like I need to make sure I have a lot of variety and that I'm reflecting like the entire world, the entire scope of the world. So even though like I like writing characters like this, I need to make sure I have a broad range of characters that are like not what I like, because that's how the world is. There's all kinds of people. Some of them aren't really my kind of people. Some of them do things I don't care about. Some of them have lives that bore me. So I feel like I had to incorporate like the diversity of all of humanity in my books, and I couldn't repeat things very often. But as I got older, I started to change my feelings on this, because when you're writing a book, you're choosing particular people and a particular place to write about in that book. And, you know, maybe in like your peripheral side characters, you might want more variety. But when it comes to like your main characters, your main setting, all of that, I don't think there's anything wrong in saying, I like this particular type of person. It kind of becomes your brand, because readers who pick up your book are going to like those things too. So this also filters down to the type of male characters you're going to write. If I was reflecting all of male identity that I have ever encountered, both closely and in passing, I would have a lot more guys who like to sit around and watch football, who never talk about their feelings. Lots of types of men that I don't really allow in my life in any kind of long-term way, because either I find them toxic or we just don't have anything in common or anything to talk about. So if I don't allow those people in my life in real life, why would I want to spend a ton of time with them in a book either? Now, sometimes they creep in because people can surprise you, and characters can also surprise you. Occasionally I write a character who's not really my type whatsoever, but they start to reveal interesting facets to me, and they work their way into my life and my heart and my book anyway. But for the most part, you're going to find certain types of men in my books repeatedly. I try not to make them just pure fantasy, unrealistic, but I would say that they tend to be a little more emotionally sensitive and a little more intellectual than like your average man if you averaged out everybody, because that is reflective of the men that I actually know in real life, the men that I choose to have as my friends. The one point in Book Fox's video that I perhaps did resonate with more than anything else was number 7, male friendships, that I have noticed in some books. You know, there's a trope, and it's actually a trope that I kind of like, but nevertheless, this is definitely a female fantasy trope, that you'll have male friendships where they're like super close and they kind of act more like female friends, like really friendly and encouraging and warm to each other. Now, the men around me, despite being these intelligent and emotionally sensitive men, I've noticed that their friendships tend to often be a little competitive, or they have a lot of like kind of hassling of each other, sometimes kind of busting each other's balls, or just kind of like making jokes. Like the men I've known, whether it's my dad, my partner, other friends, they act kind of differently around their male friends. Like as soon as a male friend of theirs comes into the picture, it feels to me like often men sort of reserve their emotions for the women in their lives, not the men in their lives. Dade's actually kind of said that to me in various ways, that I'm so important to him because I'm like the person he can bring his emotions to, whereas his closest male friends, they don't talk about that stuff so much. Whereas my closest female friend, you know, we hear every emotion the other person is having. We will totally dump emotions on each other. So when I write male friendships, they've always been somewhat reflective of what I've observed in the men around me, with perhaps the most obvious example being in the potion dealers. Alfred and George have like kind of that master-servant dynamic to a certain level. George is like Alfred's sworn right-hand man bodyguard since like childhood, whereas Alfred is like the heir. That's a very common, tropey, fanficky, romancy dynamic, and it is one I happen to like. But their relationship with each other is like constantly hassling each other. They never, almost never, tell each other how much they mean to each other, or they're not like sweet to each other. They hassle each other about everything. They'll get into physical fights with each other, you know, playfully, and nothing is off limits. They will pick on each other's greatest weaknesses, but that's like how they express affection for each other. The fact that they can joke with each other about things they're sensitive about is, I think, partly what makes their friendship good. And kind of beyond, it kind of breaks down the barriers of that master-servant dynamic that was established for them by their parents. The fact that they do just hassle each other about everything. And I would say that ultimately they would do anything for each other. They would die to protect each other. But you know what? I'm not even sure that George would die to protect Alfred, even though I think that George loves Alfred. Sometimes they kind of screw each other over a little bit. Not necessarily on purpose. George is not really the best right-hand man. And Alfred is not always the most considerate boss, but that's kind of one of the things I like about writing them. I feel like it's more realistic than that usual trope of the master and devoted servant, in that like these are actually just both, in my mind, real dudes who have their own lives and selfish aims at times. So as much as they love each other, they are not like devoted to each other beyond all reason. But it also does depend, because the nature of male friendship has changed over time. If you look at like Tolkien or a lot of books that came around, especially World War I, there's a deeper sort of affection expressed between men to each other. I was actually just reading an LGBTQ history, and it pointed out that men used to be more openly affectionate with each other, like in letters and in their friendships, before the idea of like gay rights and gay identity came around, because then a lot of men started to be afraid that they were going to be accused of being gay, so they kind of started to like rein that affection in. Now, this is only coming from one book, and I was not alive then, so I don't know if like I haven't corroborated this thought, but it does kind of make sense actually when I look at like Victorian through Edwardian male discourse versus like the old men I knew growing up that seemed just incredibly emotionally shut off. That is an interesting theory as to why that has evolved, and that now we're finally getting back to maybe more emotional depth to male friendships. And finally, I want to give a few tips. The things that I think about when I'm trying to write a male character that I'm hoping that my audience will find to be an attractive romantic lead, but also feel like they are a real man and they don't need the woman to even be involved in the story to be an interesting person, and that a guy could read one of my books, particularly my Hidden Lands books, and feel like this is a good read for them too. Number one, I try to make sure that the guy has hobbies and interests and some kind of family or friends, all these things that stand aside from the core plot. A lot of times in romance, you get a man whose only hobby is something like his job or sword fighting, depending on your genre, and it doesn't seem like he has a lot of other stuff going on. Like he doesn't have like a nerdy comic book collection or anything like all the real guys I know, because that would I guess, lower his hotness level. But to me, I would like to see a guy who has a hobby or an interest. Makes me think there's interesting things to talk about. It gives you something to have a little fun banter about in the book even. And also just, you know, giving him some family and friends, some relationships outside of the core relationship, which really is how you would write any character to have more depth. But I see a fair amount of books where like the female lead has some kind of hobby and interest, but the guy does not. Or if he does, it's just kind of a one note and like very kind of masculine protector type of thing. Number 2, he has a real flaw. And the flaw cannot be that he's brooding or angry. Like if you read my Cursed Soul trilogy, Grau's character is he's a sorcerer and he's a little bit of that like absent-minded professor type in a way. Like he's got this sorcerer brain. He's kind of always thinking about like magic, what's going on in nature, can I get some ingredients out of it, what can I do with it. He's pretty smart and he's very devoted to the female lead because she really needs his protection and devotion to even survive the book, because she is a doll person who was created and they're a slave race, and he's trying to figure out a way for her to be like his equal and not just like this created being that he purchased. And I would say that Grau is an exceptionally good man because for the book to work, he kind of has to be. Their situation is very fraught, and it would have been very unusual for a man to be that devoted to the equality of this race of doll people. He's a very ahead of his time, very advanced kind of man. But nevertheless, there are many points throughout the book where he's a little dense or a little insensitive or a little fearful of consequences. Like there's a point where he brings Velsa home. He has to go home. His sister's getting married. And he runs into all of his childhood friends and they're kind of ribbing him like, you know, how's your doll girl doing? Like, you know, they're all being kind of assholes. And he describes her to them as worth every coin and then some. And Velsa feels very uncomfortable to be described this way. It just feels super awkward about this whole gathering. She doesn't feel like she should be there. Grau kind of drags her along like, no, you mean this much to me. I want you at my side. I want to treat you kind of as an equal. The family's all treating her poorly. She's so uncomfortable. But, you know, Grau kind of has his own agenda he's trying to balance. That he's trying to treat her like he feels she deserves to be treated. But also when he gets around his childhood friends, he blurts out something that is not super sensitive about her. And throughout the course of the book, he does slowly evolve and start to understand how to truly be an equal partner to her. But the one core thing that remains is that sometimes Grau does things that are a little bit stupid. He's not always the most emotionally sensitive character, and that is mainly that he just does not understand what it is like to be a woman in her position. And sometimes that is reflected in the things he says or does. Which brings me to my third point. If you want to write a man who feels complex and real, he should have a complicated background that contributes to both his flaws and his good points. It's very common in a lot of romance novels for men to just be like strong, maybe a little toxic, or maybe on the other hand, very deliberately non-toxic. Those are kind of your choices. And like if he is kind of toxic, there's a reason, and it's your tragic past. His mother died when he was a baby, and his father is the king or the mob boss or whatever, and he is a hard ass who's always been tough on him. So now he's kind of toxic, but he's learned to fight, and he's so strong, and he'll protect this woman no matter what. And beneath his hard, toxic exterior, there's, well, I guess there's kind of a heart a lot, but sometimes it's really just the ability to be really good in the bedroom and really, really fixated and devoted to her, which is not really the same as a good relationship. But, you know, if you're trying to write that kind of fantasy, that's fine. I'm not judging you. Sometimes this trickles into books that maybe are a little more serious, or at least could be. I don't know if serious is the right word. But basically, the more you can layer on complexity, the more of a real character you're going to get. So, like in The Potion Dealers, Alfred has the father who's kind of a hard ass, and he's the boss of an organized crime outfit. He tries to raise him to be tough, but he does he really does love his son, and he's not the greatest. He's not going to win Father of the Year awards or anything. But he allows Alfred a ton of freedom, probably more freedom than he should have had if he was going to really make him like this, you know, killer organized crime boss someday. And that makes for kind of an interesting contradiction, that while Alfred's father clearly wants him to be tough and able to handle pain and to be able to harm other people and make tough decisions, he also just kind of let him do whatever, even if it was something kind of nerdy, like Alfred spent a lot of time at the library. And that's where his father loved him too much to like be overly hard on him. Sometimes it's a little more interesting if you take that stereotype and you just kind of twist it a little. You give it a little bit of nuance, because in real life, humans are complicated. Number 4, good banter, but not just romantic banter. The male character should be able to banter about other things. This is kind of like a variation on the Bechdel test, but for men. They should be able to banter with other men or other female characters that they're not romantically involved in, family members. Like, sometimes you get a book where it only has like sexual tension, romantic banter, and that's like the only banter. I feel like it fleshes out the male character more if he can have some good rapport. Like, if he's that good at bantering with the female main character, he should have some good conversations with other characters as well. And my 5th point, although I think I ended up kind of covering it already, is just like surprise me somewhere. Sometimes there's just no surprises. Every dude feels like a variation on the exact same tropey dude. So just like throw a surprise in there. That's where I think you get a character who's a little more memorable to the reader rather than just the latest variation of this precise character trope. And again, maybe that's not your aim. That's totally fine. But for me, I want my books to be remembered by the people that read them. I want my characters to stand out in the pack. And I'd like for both men and women to be able to read my books and feel like they can enjoy my characters. But I did spend some years writing primarily paranormal romance, so I was trying to incorporate some of those tropey aspects. Now, if you have any thoughts on writing good male characters, whether it's in the context of a story with romance or not, I would love to hear the discussion. And if you'd like to read any of my books, my free book of the month, that's a new thing I'm trying out as a rotating free book of the month, is actually The Sorcerer's Concubine, the first book in the Cursed Soul trilogy that I mentioned in this video. You can find my books in the description. If you like more from me, I have both the Substack, Patreon, YouTube memberships where I post 2 bonus videos every month voted on by you guys, as well as my Discord. I would love to have you there. And if you just want to watch my videos here, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. And a big thank you to Magic Mind for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check them out using my link in the description or my QR code. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye!